Another episode of Walleye Chronicles. This week we got a lot of information, so prepare, sit back, take notes. Justin Siveverding, NWT PRO, and one of the men behind WallyeX. Justin Siveverding, everybody.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Walleye Chronicles, where I get you guys off the ice or off your boats, and we spend a little time talking fishing. Everybody likes talking fishing. So on this episode this week, I have Justin Siveverding. He is an NWT Pro, and he is also the man behind WallyeX Lures. So how you doing today, Justin?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So one thing I've kind of done some digging. There's not a lot about you, so I kind of want to do a little deep dive in your history, your childhood, how you got to where you are. I want to get the backstory of who Justin is. So
to be honest with you, I realize that social media and this whole YouTube thing, TikTok, all of this is such a relevant and important part of advertising and just daily life in modern society. But over the last few years, I've gotten to the point where I don't participate that much in social media. So, maybe stuff back 10, 15 years ago, there might be a little bit more where I was a little more active on there. And I still post from time to time, like if we go out fishing and have, a good day or something, then I might throw something on social media. But for the most part, I don't participate in it because I should say, and I guess from time to time I still do when I get active on there, some, we'll call it interesting messages, and have encountered some very interesting people along the way. So on that sense, yeah, I don't have a very big digital footprint in that sense, but a little bit about me. I've lived in South Dakota my entire life. Got into hunting and fishing like most all people through my dad and grandpa. Really growing up, it was all about walleye fishing and waterfowl hunting. So those are, still continue to be passions of mine. Obviously, walleye fishing is a massive part of my life year round since Greg Strelo, Todd Emro, and I have WallyeX lure company, and from time to time find some time to go chase those ducks and geese around. So yeah, lifelong South Dakota resident, an avid walleye fisherman, and now over the last 3 years, I guess it is, that we've had WallyeX, we've gotten really big into searching out new products and testing those ideas out and trying to bring some innovative twists to traditional classic baits along the way. So that obviously occupies a lot of our time now. And then in between there, I love tournament fishing. That's absolutely one of my passions in life. This year has started off just absolutely as a disaster. It's almost like I've completely forgot how to tournament fish or just catch fish in general. It seems like I hate to be one of those guys that says, wow, I'm a great pre-fisherman, but I can't bring anything to the scales. But I haven't even had that great of pre-fishes where I can be like, man, I'm going to win this thing. And then I just bomb it during the tournament. The first one was literally in my backyard right in Pierre, South Dakota. And, over the course of time, I'm always like, man, I wish we would come to Lake Sharp and I can have a really good finish. And then we get to Lake Sharp, and after day one, I think I was dead last and super embarrassed about that. Day two had a better day, but still didn't move that far up because I was so far behind. And then we get to the Mississippi River, have a decent pre-fish again, nothing where I thought I was going to take, a big plaque home with me, but something that maybe I could get a check, at least have a decent finish. And then it just did not go that way. So I'm kind of grasping at straws, trying to figure out what it is I'm doing wrong, what's changed with me. I feel like I still pre-fish hard and know what I'm doing, but it's just not, resulting into a good finish like I would like to have. Next week, I leave for our next event out of Alpena, Michigan, out on Lake Huron. I'm really looking forward to that. And hopefully I can get the ship righted and start to have some decent finishes. Otherwise, the September championship, I'm going to get to watch it online with everyone else instead of being there fishing. So We'll see how that turns out.
So where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Jefferson, South Dakota, which is in southeastern South Dakota. Lived there, until I started college at SDSU, and it's such a cool area down there. You have, the Missouri River and the Big Sioux River, they come together down there. Actually, it was maybe about a month and a half ago. It had been a long time since I had been down there fishing, and I had the opportunity one weekend for my nephew's birthday to go down to my parents' house and spend the weekend, pulled the boat down there, and my dad and I and uncle got out on the Missouri River, which down there it's just wild because it's not like the Missouri River up here where, it's a big, clear body of water that's easily navigable. Down there, it's a true river. It's muddy sandbars and weird places and stuff like that. And we got to get out, cast some soft plastics that we're working on for WallyeX that we're bringing to market, and caught some just great walleyes. It's really an underrated, unknown walleye fishery down below Yankton, South Dakota, where Gavin's Point Dam is, the last main stem dam on the Missouri River. A lot of people don't look at that as a walleye fishery, and I can tell you there's just a lot of beautiful fish down in there, and it's some of the most scenic area you could ever go catch a walleye in on top of that. And so that was pretty cool. It had been a long time since I got to go down there and get to go down there with my uncle and my dad. That was pretty special. So
was that someplace you grew up fishing then?
Yeah. So, from the time I was, a little kid, my grandparents spent a lot of the summers up in Fort Pierre, fishing when I was a kid. And I was like 4.5, 5 years old when they started bringing me on these little walleye trips. Basically the only agreement was as long as I could keep my mouth shut long enough where they could get some sleep at night. And so there's so many pictures of me that my grandma Sieverding has that, I'm a little 5-year-old kid holding an 8-pound walleye, and I don't remember it, but I know it happened because there's a picture. But so walleye fishing has just been a part of my life since I could literally walk. And that's translated into, a lifelong passion where, obviously tournament fishing is a natural extension into that. And then us, the three of us having WallyeX, is just another extension of that passion.
So what was it like though, going back to a place you grew up at with a really cool boat, live scope, all these things you didn't have as a kid? Were you all like kid in a candy store? I want to do this, and this.
I've gotten so spoiled on the places where we get to fish that I told my dad when we were coming down, I was like, I want to pull my boat down there and I want access to the tools we didn't have growing up, and my dad, he's always had a nice boat and good electronics and stuff like that. But, since he's, gotten to the point where he'd rather go fish the glacial lakes area of South Dakota, he doesn't spend any time out there. And so I was a little nervous in getting up there, running into a sandbar, doing this or that. Didn't have any of that. But then, when you get into that, channelized river with the big long wing dams that aren't sunken under the water like you see in the Mississippi River, where, they're big rock dams that, stretch from shoreline, 100 yards out into the river. And you get these cups and cuts at the end of those. You'll find that, these modern electronics don't necessarily show you what it is that you're trying to target and fish with, other than the fact you can look at it and say, well, there's, a tree snag there, so maybe there's some fish hanging out, there's a current eddy in there, or, there's a more gentle grade on, the quartzite rock that they use to build the wing dams. And, there's a hole sitting, parallel to that. But you're not really using forward-facing sonar to cast to an individual fish. You're more using that technology to pick out areas where you think it's going to hold fish instead of targeting an individual fish. And so in that sense, you're really kind of going back to your roots where you're just fishing by feel. It's this area looks right, so I'm going to go cast to it and hope there's fish there. And it actually took us, we started fishing reasonably early in the morning, and it took us 2 or 3 hours to finally find an area where, there were saugers and walleyes in that area. We caught, white bass and drum and smallmouth bass. There's a lot of smallmouth bass, and it's like we're in a WallyeX boat. Like, we're not out here bass fishing, even though I do like catching bass. I do give the bass guys a lot of harassment around that, but they are fun to catch. So it was fun, and the river changed, a ton since the last time I had been down there. In 2011, we had a huge flood through the Missouri River system, and so anything that I thought I knew about it was drastically different now. So, like I said, it was really fun because, one of the people I got to fish with being my dad and my uncle, but also, basically just turn off the technology and just go fishing. And sometimes in modern times, we forget that sometimes that's what we should do, because we spend so much time up at the front of our boats just zeroed in on a graph with forward facing sonar on it, and we're just trying to snipe an individual fish that we forget to look around and see. We get to fish some pretty scenic places, and we completely forget about that. And just a quick side note on that, last fall up on Lake Oahe, I was up fishing over some trees, and I was really focused down on the fish in the trees, because we're all trying to catch that next state record out of Lake Oahe, which is just unbelievably healthy with big fish right now. And I could hear this like loud sound, and I looked over, and there were like 150 buffalo just walking right along the shoreline with me. And like, I just pretty much will stop fishing for 10 or 15 minutes and just watch this happen, because you're up in this just untamed area of South Dakota where you can look on that western side of the lake, and there's no development over there. It is, other than the fact that the water is, 100 feet higher than what it would have been if there was no dam involved. I mean, this is literally what, the natives would have seen, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when it was, just that untamed, beautiful landscape with buffalo walking the shores of the Missouri River. And sometimes we completely forget to pay attention and enjoy, that sort of beauty. So that was a pretty special experience for me. And like I said, going home, it was nice too, because you're not focused in on technology. You're sitting there, chatting and just fishing. So that's probably the thing that we should all start doing more is, look up from the graph from time to time and take in what it is we actually are out there to enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't live very far away from where I grew up, and every couple of years I try to go back just because I don't fish there anymore, right? And it's a small river system. And I still go back up in there, and it just you bring all the old memories back, and it's just kind of a blast to be up there and think of all the other times that you didn't have, and it's nice bringing your new equipment with you. But like you said, it's just kind of nice to turn off and just relax and float down the river and see, trees that wasn't there when I was, here, and this tree's bigger, or now it's silted in and this is, 3 feet shallower, and you better watch out. So it is kind of cool.
Yeah, things change quickly. You got to take it all in while you can.
Cool. So you grew up down there, did fishing. Was it all walleye fishing? Did any ice fishing like that as growing up?
Yeah. So I mean, I enjoy ice fishing. The older I get, I would say the less I enjoy ice fishing. And that has to do with the fact that I don't enjoy cold weather that much. I just when growing up, I knew people that would just pack up and go south for the winter, and that just boggled my mind that somebody would want to do that. And now I'm like, wow, these people really have life figured out. Like, you stay up here, enjoy the Midwest during the summer, minus the 109 degree temperature days that you have. And then when it starts to get cold, head south and enjoy more of that same temperature. So that's really the limiting factor with me for ice fishing. Obviously, if I can take the ice shack and the heater, I'm all in. But around here, oftentimes we don't get that great of ice. So, we got to pick and choose. Now, if we get out on the glacial lakes in eastern South Dakota, or we try to make a trip up to Lake Winnipeg, then that's a little different story where you're driving out on ice and you can pull the ice shack, take, a snowmobile or four-wheeler or whatever it might be out there. And in that sense, I really enjoy it. And I will say that, that's the time of the year that I really get into targeting perch and bluegills. And since those are my two favorite fish to eat, there's still a lot of reason for me to go ice fishing, even if I have to endure a little bit of cold weather. But, we have now access to such good apparel to keep us warm, like that new whitewater, insulated suit is just fantastic for cold weather, and base layers on that, it's not bulky, and so I shouldn't complain that much. But if the wind's blowing 40 miles an hour and it's 25 degrees out, I might just enjoy going and having a nice ribeye with my wife rather than going out and catching myself a limit of perch and then having to fry them up.
Right, that's fine. Bluegill are very underrated table fare, I feel.
Not only are they incredible fighters, as far as their size goes, like they give probably. I wish that bluegills got to be 5 pounds. I don't even know if we could land them. They fight so hard. You get a 10-inch bluegill and they fight like a 20-inch walleye, and so that's fun in and of itself. And then they're such voracious feeders that once a school comes up, it's like as fast as you can get a jig to the bottom. So it's fun in that aspect. But yeah, as far as table fare goes, I love, they have that kind of that sweetness to their fillets. And I absolutely love bluegill. That is my number one favorite fish to eat, and then followed by a perch.
Wow. Yeah. Growing up, we were pretty much a bluegill family. We, a lot of our fishing ventures were to put food on the table for, 3 to 4 nights a week. We were, we were fish, and the rest of the weeks it was venison. That's kind of how I grew up. So,
and venison is pretty hard to beat that in itself too. Like I love just pan fried in butter venison backstrap like that. You cook that to medium rare. There are a few things as good eating as that.
No, there's not really. No, I can't think of anything other than maybe fish. I lean more towards fish. But that's awesome. So you went to college. Was there any time back when you're younger where you were ever tinkering with lures, or was that ever,
a good friend of mine, Joe Truey, and I, when we were quite a bit longer, I remember his grandpa had a bandsaw, and we used to like cut baits out of wood, and then like kind of like form like a rudimentary bait. And then I think we used like the little plastic dividers from like a Plano tackle box, and we would just cut those and like cut a slit and glue that in, and then like a little eye bolt, put that in as the lip, and blah blah blah. So we would mess around. I don't know that we were ever very successful with any of those sorts of designs, and that was incredibly crude, obviously. And as far as, if you're...
Hey, listeners, let's talk outdoor streaming. What is the best outdoor streaming platform out there? Well, it's simple. It's Fixed TV. Not only do they have this great program, but they have all kinds of hunting and fishing shows, along with some weaponry shows. So when you get bored and need something to do, get your fix with Fixed TV.
If you're trying to lead into like the creation of WallyeX or why it is that exists, so Greg Strelo, who also fishes the National Walleye Tour as a pro, he and Brad Davis, Mr. Brad Davis, we should call him, he's just a venerable legend of walleye fishing. He's been there, done that. He has the t-shirt. Unfortunately, he doesn't fish anymore, but I had the privilege to fish with him for quite a few years. But those guys, they had their team. I believe Paul Moline was in there, another great fisherman, and just by happenstance, one day I happened to be eating at a restaurant. We were in Oconto, Wisconsin. It was in 2020 during COVID, and Oconto was actually our first tournament that year. We were supposed to start in Chamberlain, but nobody knew what was going on with COVID, so they pushed it back, and I think that was in like July. But anyway, we were having dinner, and I happened to run into Greg, and we just started BSing and became fast friends. And he had drawn Todd Emro, who was a professional muskie fisherman who decided that he wanted to try doing the co-angler side of the National Walleye Tour and pick up some tips and tactics from some of the pros. And so they knew each other from being drawn in a tournament together, and Todd started traveling with them. And Paul had stopped fishing on the National Walleye Tour, so they invited me to fish with them. And so, Todd and I and Brad and Greg, we just kind of formed this quick bond. And over some barley soda pops, we started, discussing out. This is before that craze, or the craze that is happening right now with forward-facing sonar, where there was still a lot of crankbait pulling going on. And, I love casting, but my roots are definitely in pulling crankbaits. And Brad Davis, same way. Todd is a big guy into casting for muskies, but also loves pulling crankbaits for salmon. He's up on Superior and does a lot of trolling for salmon. And Greg, he lives on Lake Winnebago and does a lot of trolling for walleyes out there. And really, we started to talk through things like, if this were something we had the ability to design, what changes would we make? Things like the bait coming out of the package tuned, that after you catch a few fish on it, that it stays in tune. Durable finishes on there. So if you catch a couple fish, the paint doesn't just start falling off of the bait. Quality components, sharp hooks that, have a little give to them so they're not just breaking off. The construction of the bait, that if you get a big fish on a small bait, the bait just doesn't break in half. Just stuff like that, we see with some of our competitors' baits. And then, we kind of got real serious with it. And Todd and Greg are just, captains of industry. They were, just big parts of big corporations and retired early and have so much business knowledge and just business acumen that, they have that forward facing view as to how to successfully run a business. And I kind of handle the design engineering part of it. Like, I can take and sit down and through CAD and, design out these baits, and they play a big part, because since they're fishermen as well, they are able to say, well, this is the sort of action that we want in this bait, or just the overall shape of the bait. Do we want it to look more like a smelt? Do we want it to look like a bream, like a shad? All of those different things. And, after we had enough barley soda pops, we kind of figured, let's try to do something here. And so, our game plan was, when we came to market, and we came to market in 2023, I think it's been basically 2 years almost to the day that our online store went active. What we wanted to do is, right out of the gate, have a full line of baits. And, by the time that this came around, that this launch happened, obviously forward-facing sonar became a huge part of walleye fishing and just fishing in general. So we have, we had caught onto that bandwagon ourselves and started design baits that, were more for casting, like our X slab and our kamikaze bait. Obviously we have our trolling baits, our X shads, brawlers, rippers, predator, and then like the ripper, which is our lipless bait. So, we went through and, we really spend a lot of time thinking through the baits and the actions they have. We send those to, 3D printers, and then we get our 3D printed samples, test those out, make sure the actions are how we want them, take a lot of underwater video with GoPros. And then, after we get that, we just draw lines on the baits. And the 3D prints are a kind of an ivory color. And so we'll put markings on the baits. So when we have the GoPro moving through the water with them, we know, that the X's are on the bottom, and we have straight lines on the top. And then we have, bold coloring on the back. So we can watch that bait move through the water and start to adjust, weight chambers and the angle of attack of the bill and stuff like that. So we can really drive the actions we want. And after that process happens, then obviously we CNC out the molds, and then we get the plastic samples. And from there, then it really comes into the weighting of the bait. How deep do we want it to dive? How loud do we want the bait to be? Stuff like that. So the three of us, that's just kind of in our nature. I guess we're very analytical people. And after the X shad was the first bait we worked on, and after we kind of saw that, hey, we can actually design out a pretty good bait here, then it just kind of snowballed into something where, we had like 168 SKUs or something like that when the website went active, and people were like, well, how all of a sudden do you go from this company doesn't exist to you have a full product line? And that's just kind of how we do things. And we've continued plugging away on that. Like, we just, we actually released it last fall, but, just brought into the online store our new depth charge, which is, a casting bait, designed into this forward-facing sonar craze. I already mentioned our kamikaze, and then on that, incorporating curvatures and sharp enough angles where these baits reflect back that forward-facing sonar, so that no matter what brand of sonar you're using, it's very visible on there. So if you have a bait, a school of bait fish, or you have a pod of predatory fish, that right where that bait is as it's traveling through the water column, so that you're targeting the fish you want to target. So like I said, it's really a pretty neat process, and I'm very fortunate that with the two guys that I'm partnered up with on that we all mesh. We think a lot alike, and we're able to bounce ideas off of each other and really bring products to market that we're obviously really happy with, because it's our company, but we've proven that actually work in catching fish as well.
So did you guys do them all at the same kind of basic time, kind of have 2 or 3 go at the same time?
So the X-Shad, the Ripper, the Predator, the Brawler, and the Renegade, we did, and then the Kamikaze and the X-Slab, we did all of those baits. We designed them all simultaneously.
Oh.
And, actually I have a couple of them sitting here. So I'll just show you, this is a Renegade. And the hallmark of our build hard baits is we call it the saber lip bill. And it's a pretty wild bill shape. It's got some really neat geometry behind it. Try to show you kind of the curvature of the bill there. And then we have these paddles out front. And, that was one thing that, like I said, when we sat down and we talked through originally, why we wanted to do this. And it was, we want to build baits that we see other companies deficient in. We want, bait we control at a slow speed, at a high speed, and get good action out of, that stays down in the water. They're not blowing out side to side, that, they're in tune right out of the package, that they stay in tune, and the color. So, just to kind of go over, our bill, and there's different, this is a Brawler I'll put beside it, but you can see they both have these kind of nodules at the front of it, these little paddles. Yep. And that's one thing, you can take, a little Predator here, and run this thing at 10 miles an hour. And obviously you're never going to actually fish with it at 10 miles an hour, but I use that as an example of how stable these baits are in the water. And that's really because of these little paddles at the front. And the only thing that I could think to reference, because it's from a physics standpoint, really the same concept is winglets on an airplane. So if you sit on an airplane and you look out the window to the tip of the wing, you might see that vertical protrusion that goes up at the tip of the wing, or it might go down, or you might have one that goes up and down depending on what kind of winglet it is. But those winglets, as water comes, or air, water and air are both fluids, right? But water is just a lot more dense. When air comes over the top of the airplane wing, you get these little micro vortices that come off the back of it, and that creates a lot of drag. And the winglets actually take care of that. So what it does is it reduces something called interference drag. And that's what these do, but only in water. So this just punches clean water, this hole in the water that's nice and clean. And it allows this bait to stay super stable at high speeds instead of wanting to blow out one way or the other, because it actually tries to correct itself out. If it gets to one side or the other, it actually wants to slide back into that pocket of clean water. And with that, what we're able to do is impart more action into the head of the bait. So, a lot of bait companies, they give that tail flicker action, right? Or they'll do that side to side yaw or roll. And it's really hard to incorporate kind of a 3-dimensional movement like that, because that means the bill has to step out of line from the bait from time to time. And when that happens, that bait is going to have a tendency to roll up or out. Well, our bait, we can put that head action in, so we get that 3-dimensional, big, wide movement out of the bait. But that bait isn't going to step out, because if it gets too far up out of that pocket of clean water that it's punching, it just naturally wants to settle back into that pocket. And so we get some really neat actions out of there. And then, how do we modify it where they don't all then have the exact same action, right? That's our biggest question that we get is, well, don't they all just have the same action? And the way that we get around that then is, like I said, we'll modify out these bills. They have the same sort of, curvature to them, and kind of same shape, but with that brawler, it's a more elongated shape, so we can impart more of that balsa action like you would get out of a bait, where it's more of that roll, like that classic original floater. It's what makes that so effective as a bait is it shows the belly and then the back, right? Like it's just up and around like this all the time. And some of our competitors, they do a lot to try to make that action happen, and by weighting the bait in a certain way, and we go into it from a little bit different perspective, that we try to just allow the water to push that bait in those directions instead of weighting in a certain way. And what that allows us to do then is put some neat geometries into the rattle chambers, where our baits, when they move through water, they produce just an incredible amount of sound. I mean, I'm not moving that bait that much, and I don't know if you can hear that, but
sure.
So we do things a little bit different, but we put a lot of thought into just the engineering part of it, and then the physics of why it's actually happening that way. And then all of our baits are ultrasonically welded, so we don't try to epoxy like some of our competitors try to epoxy baits together. So on the A side and the B side, when all the BBs are laid in, and then the fixtures for the hardware for the hook hangers or the line tie or anything like that, that's all put in. There's a lip on there, and then the second half comes in, and then we actually have a mold that comes in, and with high frequency vibration, that little lip that's on the one side, it melts and it seals that bait together, so there's no chance of water intrusion into the bait. So that was one thing on some of the baits, especially on Lake Erie. I won't name them, but it's a very prominent bait out there that you catch a few fish, it gets out of tune, and all of a sudden it's like, man, that thing's just not moving anymore. And you look at it and it's like, oh, it's full of water. And so, we really want to think about things in a little bit different sense. That are we, in a certain sense, not reinventing the mousetrap? Yes. Yeah. We're still making a bait, and there's an expectation to a certain profile with that bait, but we want to take and make a better bait at basically the same price point. We don't cut corners in any sense of it. We use super high quality finishes. Everything's hand painted. We use high quality hooks, high quality components. Since these are all catted out, at plus or minus, a thousandth of a millimeter, like when they get ultrasonically welded together, they run almost perfectly straight right out of the mold. But then we do tank test every single bait. And so, those are just things that us as fishermen, and especially as tournament fishermen, because we do subject our equipment to some pretty harsh environments from time to time. And these are just things that, we demand out of our products, and we saw a need for it in the market. And that's where, WallyeX comes from. And especially like, we talked about, glide bait fishing is becoming, or is such a big deal, but is becoming more prevalent with people who would have never thought to do it because of forward facing sonar. And so like our kamikaze, we have a couple different sizes of this, but it's all molded in one piece. So there's no fin to break off the back. Right. And, there's two line ties. So, you affect the action of the bait by what line tie you go into it. This is basically a piece of lead. And when it comes out of the mold, it goes into an injection mold. And then all of this plastic is injection molded around it. So, we love glide bait fishing. Like, I'll be honest, like, jig wrap fishing back in the day, that is my favorite way to catch fish. It's like combat fishing, and there's nothing like when a fish latches onto that bait. But I hate that you catch a couple fish and then you got to throw that bait away because the wing is missing. Well, kamikaze, you don't have to worry about that. And then we go back to forward facing sonar and being able to view it on forward facing sonar. So just little things from like the curvature of the back here, and even the curvature of the bait this way. And then even the scaling we put in, we have a lateral line in here because you can't guarantee that this bait is always going to be in one position or the other to the forward facing sonar. So we incorporate this curvature and texturing into it, so it's visible no matter how this bait is sitting in relationship to that forward facing sonar. And that helps people track it and make sure that they're presenting the bait to the fish in the most effective way. And even like our depth charge that we just released out here recently, there's this concave surface that's right in front of the line tie. So as you're reeling this bait back in, the forward facing sonar hits this. There's also curvature here. It just reflects that back and it just makes it glow. And then on top of that, that allows us, stability in the water too. So there's this bait, some of our competitors, in this whole, casting out a piece of lead with a prop on it.
Right. There's a lot of people in that market now.
A lot of our competitors, they tangle bad, right? This bait you'd take and throw all day and it might tangle one time, maybe. But even we designed our own hook in here, so it's got a big bait keeper on it, and then a little bit of an, it basically is a slow death hook, but stuff to just make sure that the night crawler stays on, so we don't need to have an extra treble hook, something to get snagged up on things in there too. So like I said, we put a lot of thought into the baits we bring to market, and we're working on just a ton of new stuff too. Like that's one of the neatest parts of this whole adventure with Todd and Greg for me is that we don't just sit around. We're always thinking of different baits we want to bring to market. Like we're working on another shad style bait with and a stick bait with a new bill called the dataless bill. Like when we talked about the saber lip bill, that's this bill. We have the dataless bill, which is kind of the inverse of that. That's going to have some really cool action. Obviously, those are baits for trolling or casting. That's still a huge part of walleye fishing. You go to the Great Lakes, 90% of people are still going to pull a crankbait around. And even around here, pulling crankbaits is never going to go away. It's an incredibly effective way to catch nice fish,
Mm-hmm.
But we can't get away from the fact that forward-facing sonar, it's here to stay. And, I hear a lot of people moan and groan about how it's ruining fishing. And, I'm sure that the same people moaned and groaned when we got side scan and we got GPS mapping on sonar. Like it's not the end all, and actually it can be detrimental to fishermen. I'm a prime example of it. You're like, hey, that's an 8-pound walleye, and I spent an hour and a half trying to catch it, and I don't catch it. And I go to the scale, and during tournament day, and I only caught one fish all day, instead of moving around. But we have some pretty cool forward-facing sonar baits on the way. I mentioned that we are working on soft plastics, and we're trying to incorporate things into them to make them super visible, along with some jigs with some neat geometries that stand up in a couple different positions and reflect good out on forward-facing sonar. So we have a lot of things coming down the line as far as WallyeX products go, and I just can't say how excited I am to be a part of it, and that Todd and Greg and I just one day over barley soda pops decided to start doing this. So
that's funny. So of that first set of lures, which one was the hardest one that you guys just took forever to get going? Was there one you guys just back and forth on? And
the hardest one to get right was definitely the X shad, and the reason why the X shad was so tough is we wanted a bait that had an action that was very similar to a bait made out of balsa wood. Okay. And trying to get the weighting of the bill, because you have to take into account like the thickness of the bill. That's a certain amount of mass out ahead of the line tie, right? Mm-hmm. And trying to get that mass right out in front of the bill where it imparted an action we wanted, and then that bait is actually that bill is actually very narrow compared to the width of the bait compared to some of our other ones. And so trying to get the action out of the bait, but making it stable at high speeds, that was tough for me. Like there were a lot of 3D prints that went into that. And you have to understand that we are very anal retentive by nature. So, when we're metering out action, thankfully having Lake Oahe 5 miles away, and that's super clean water, and being able to go put a GoPro in the water and cruise around and watch the bait move and compare, different 3D prints with that. It's one of those things that, I can take and 3D print something out in not very long and then glue it together and take it up on the lake and test it out. So went through a lot of different iterations of that, but there was also a learning process there too for us where, everything else after that was easy, because it's like, well, if we modify out this and we use that bill itself as weight instead of trying to put lead BBs or stainless steel BBs in certain places of the bait to weight it out, which is kind of a little bit of a different approach to it than what other companies do. Because if you look at some companies' bills, they're very narrow, and sometimes you might get a hit on one of our competitors' baits, and you reel it in, and all you have is the bill left, right? Because that bill just broke away from the body of the bait. And so that process of learning that we could, produce a bait with a really thick bill and use that as weighting to drive depth, drive action, and then also a connection point where we knew that bait wasn't going to break. Like, you could be out on Lake Oahe and all of a sudden hear the Jaws theme start playing and know that if he hits that bait, you're going to reel that fish in. It's that kind of confidence in the bait, the integrity of the bait, that it's not going to break. But that revelation that sometimes instead of trying to put a lead BB in a certain place and just use the bill as mass, that's why that bait was so hard to figure out, I would say, or get the action of right compared to what we wanted. And after that, then everything has come a lot easier than that until we got to the dataless bill. And the dataless bill is going to be just big in the fact that it's going to impart an action that is just wild and crazy, but a bait that, again, you can pull it, 10 miles an hour and that bait's going to stay down in the water column. So, but also we were able to apply a lot from what we learned from the saber lip in that dataless bill, knowing that, it's okay to not have a little flimsy, scanty bill on a bait, that you can have a big meaty bill on there and that bait's going to be just fine.
Yeah, for sure. That's I mean, so was that when that one was done, was that your aha moment for all the rest of them? And was it just like you guys just started rolling through them then?
Yeah. So after that was done, so what's funny is we got that, so it's the number 9 X shed. So it's this, we have 3 different sizes of the X shed, but this is the big one. Like we it's a big bait. It's 100 millimeters long. And after that bait was it's like, well, this is the action we want. So we sent it to the CNC machine to get, the actual molds made. And then, we have, a plastic prototype, right? Where then we're going to take and we're going to fill in the peripherals of, how much rattle sound do we want to put into this bait? Because it can be as loud or as quiet as you want. The size of the BB, the material it's made out of, all of these things that's just our personal preference or what we feel is going to catch a fish. So we got this first one done. We got the BBs in there where we thought, hey, this is where we want it. And we just had it just plain Jane painted. I think it was white with a blue back and then a chartreuse belly. And I mean, it was crude. And what we actually did is take this bait and we got some reels where they were metered off and we know exactly how much line is on them. Yep. And we just wanted to test the depth because a lot of people don't realize that it's not the angle of the bill that dictates the dive depth. It's actually the surface area of the bait compared to the volume of water that the bait displaces. So how buoyant is it? And then the weighting in the bait of itself. And so that's actually what dictates out how deep a bait is going to dive. And so we just wanted to pull this bait and see how deep it would dive. So we got 2 boats. We got my father-in-law's boat, and he's going to let this line out, and we're going to sit behind him with forward-facing sonar, Lowrance active target, and we're just going to see, active target's going to tell us plus or minus 1/10 of a foot right where that bait is in the water column, right? So we tell him let 100 feet of line out because that just seems to be everybody's go-to, 100 feet. Like, I don't know why it's just 100 feet. So told him, let out 100 feet of line. We're figuring it's going to dive, about 14 feet or so. So he gives the thumbs up that there's 100 feet of line out. And I go pulling up behind his boat, try to guess where about that bait's going to be below us. And I see this bait down in the water. And all of a sudden I see this thing come up off the bottom. We're in about 20 feet of water, come up and just attack it. And I'm like, I think you have a fish on. And, and so it's my father-in-law and my dad in his boat. And so, they're like, oh, yeah. So my dad grabs the rod out of the rod holder. My father-in-law is driving his boat and we're right there. And you know how walleyes have this propensity to come to the surface after they hit. And I'm like right beside the bait. And all of a sudden this like 9-pound walleye comes up right beside my boat. And I actually grabbed my net and netted the fish from my boat. And like, we were ecstatic that this happened. Like, we literally drove this bait 50 feet and we caught a trophy walleye on it. It's like, okay, we might be onto something. And we did make some different, or a few little changes to it as far as, the rattles and stuff like that go. But after that one bait was done, then it comes down to just a matter of 3-dimensional scaling. Like, we scale the bait down, and then you can produce, we have the 9, the 7, and the 5. We're working on a couple other sizes of that bait. But then, like I said, after we knew that bill shape was what we wanted, and we kind of had the idea behind using, like I said, the bill for weighting instead of trying to put lead BB so far forward in the head to dictate dive depth, that we just ran through, the Predator was the next one, then we did the Renegade, and then the Brawler, and then those were our build baits, and then we did the Ripper for a lipless bait, because I do love a good lipless crankbait bite. That's just that ranks right up there with a glide bait bite for me. I just absolutely love that. But yeah, to answer your question in a very long sense, after we had that number 9 X shad done, we knew we had the physics figured out as far as the bills went, and then as far as the engineering goes to make a quality bait that would hold up and withstand a lot of fish impacts. We just ran right through the rest of the line after that. Like, it maybe took a month to design the first X shad, and then the next month and a half we had an entire line of baits that then we already had the 3D printers, and we're out actively testing and just fine tuning into what actions we actually wanted out of them.
That's cool. So after you do all the hard part, right?
Yep.
You got design, everything's working the way you wanted. Tell me about the fun part, the coloring part, and what colors you decided to go with.
That's the hardest part for me.
That seems like that'd be even harder than designing it.
My wife, like, people will be like, oh man, my wife gets so many Amazon packages. Like, guys will tell me, like, I went home and there were 6 Amazon packages at the house. That's not my wife. Like, she does a little online shopping, this or that, but there will be packages at our door for me that are custom painted crankbaits. Like, I love custom painted crankbaits, and it is so hard for me and that's where Greg and Todd come in, because it is tough for me to say these are the only colors I want. Otherwise we would have 500 colors,
right? And
that's just not feasible. Like, we probably have too many colors for a little tiny company. Like, people are like, we'll go into dealer meetings and people, the buyers will be like, I thought you guys were a much bigger company than this, because you have this big product set up and you have all of these colors. And it's like, nah, it's just 3 guys that like to go fishing, and so for me, the hardest part is picking colors and, like, limiting myself to what colors we want. Obviously you need, the fire tiger and crawdad and clown and these colors. So, those are no brainers, but then, like, there's some other just wild colors that I'm like, man, we should have that. And they're like, no, we don't need that. No, if you want that, call up a custom painter and get them painted. And that is what I do. And those are my shoes, right? Like, so I just have tons of tackle boxes with tons of custom painted baits. And that is just my forte into fishing. So I let those guys kind of pick out the colors, because we all know what colors catch fish,
that's true.
Especially, like on casting baits, that pearl white and purple is a big one, blue and chrome, black and chrome, white, gold, these colors, that we have, like, in our depth charge lineup. These are very important colors that put fish in the boat. And I get that we need them. But then there are some colors, like this is a Ben Garrison, a custom bait that he made for me that I use out on Erie. It works anywhere. But like, guys like Ben, like, I'll call him up, be like, man, can I send you a bunch of blanks and you paint them up for me? And it'd be like, it's going to take me a while, but I'll paint them. I'm like, I'll wait however long you need. Just get them painted and send them to my house.
Yeah, I suppose you're kind of stuck. I mean, you have to decide how many colors you're going to carry, and then you automatically half or 2/3 of them are gone to just standard colors, right? That you have to have. And you get the 1 or 2 you guys can kind of play with it in your own kind of thing with.
Yeah, so you need to have those standard colors. From a sales perspective, you have to have those colors that people are going to buy and that have a lot of faith in. And like this is a color that's big out on the Great Lakes. This is our Ripper, our lipless crankbait. I think they call this Marvin out there, but this is one of my favorite colors, just absolutely anywhere. And we should have this in our product lineup, but we don't. But thankfully, My buddy Matt from out at Vertical Jigs and Customs, like he can paint them up for me, and then no one has to listen to me complain that it's not in our product lineup. But like Fire Tiger, you absolutely have to have Fire Tiger in your lineup. Like it's a bait that puts fish in the boat. There's just no getting around that. Crawdad, Clown, black and or a blue and chrome. Like, so yeah, we have to have those colors because people are going to go in. They have confidence. They've used them their entire lives. They know they catch fish, and that's what we need instead of a color like this where they're like, yeah, that's a gimmick. That guy just did it because he likes it. But actually, this is really a great color. So,
you find
that's the hard part for me.
Those weird colors that work certain areas, so like
up
on the bay.
Yeah, and you get certain colors that like out in the great.
Have.
Yep.
But you can't
100%.
Do a whole company around this region's colors and that region's colors.
If it were up to me, like I said, we'd probably have like 75 different colors. Because I'll just be scrolling Facebook at times, and obviously, like I'm a part of like some custom painting groups, and I'll just be scrolling through, and someone will have a new color that they just came up with, and it's like I can't even hit message fast enough and type a message like, will you take like blanks of from a different company, and paint them? Oh yeah, I will. And it's like, can you give me your address? I'm going to send you some baits right now. So that appeases me in that sense. But yeah, we have 12 colors in our standard lineup, and then we have clear and chrome and foil, and those are for the custom painters.
Yep. So I do I want to get into a little bit of the tournament fishing with you.
Yeah.
So we kind of skipped over that a little bit, but you started tournament fishing before WallyeX, I believe, correct?
Yep. Yeah. So I mean,
what pushed you into tournament fishing?
So when I was a kid, we used to fish this Punk McKelvey tournament. So my uncle Bill, it's his brother. He would put on this tournament every single year, and I would fish it with my dad and one of his friends, Dave Henry, and we always did fantastically well in it. Like we won it a bunch of times, and you know how it is. Like you're a kid and you win, and I don't know that it was ever something. I mean, I know you weren't going to go make a mortgage payment off of what we won. It's more out of fun. It was maybe like 20 teams, but it was it was all friends and family that would get together and do this out of Platte Creek on Lake Francis Case every year, and it's just something I look forward to, and it was something I got to do with my dad. And like I said, when we won a couple of them, then I just got that drive. Like I love this. I get this exhilaration out of tournament fishing and competing against other people, and that just never really left. And then trying to think outside the box of different ways to catch fish when fishing is slow, and coming up with different if everybody was live bait fishing and that was just what you needed, it could be something as stupid as well, now we know more about it, but if you're bottom bouncer fishing in 10 feet of water, pulling those bottom bouncers off the break, into deeper water, and you're actually catching the fish suspended, stuff like that. Now it's obvious to us because we can watch these fish with forward facing sonar, and we know that it's not that these fish went deep after the sun came up. It's that they're still 10 feet down, but instead of being 10 feet down in 12 feet of water, they're 10 feet down over 100 feet of water. And so just stuff like that. And I kind of was onto that when I was younger, tournament fishing, because it seemed like, it was always kind of some wonky ideas, and we would do well in the tournaments. And as I got older, I just got more and more serious about it, like learning, reading electronics and I've always been a Lowrance guy and always will be a Lowrance guy. And looking at it, and you have your depth line, and all of a sudden there's like this orangish yellow blob that you can just barely see on the bottom, and that's not a rock, that's a fish. And interpreting that kind of stuff, and I really, like I said, I always had a passion for walleye fishing, but tournament fishing is kind of comparing your abilities and your knowledge against other people's, and the older I got, the more and more I wanted to compete at higher and higher levels. And then the FLW tournament, like a little too young to have gotten in on the PWT days. So then, the FLW came was around, and I was just kind of I don't know, quote unquote, coming to age when that was going out. And then, after I got out of college, then, a few years there where it's like I couldn't swing, getting out to the National Walleye Tour, you just fish like local events and stuff like that. And then, after you see some success in that and start building up where, you have the boat and the equipment to go compete out on the National Walleye Tour, and then, actually get in there and start fishing full time on it. And now it's one of those things that I spend too much time thinking about.
Hey listeners, let's talk outdoor streaming. What is the best outdoor streaming platform out there? Well, it's simple. It's Fix TV. Not only do they have this great program, but they have all kinds of hunting and fishing shows along with some weaponry shows. So when you get bored and need something to do, get your fix with Fix TV.
Tournament fishing. Like, I just am always like just looking at maps and reading about things, because there are a lot of people who do some pretty crazy things to catch fish, and you really need to have all of that in your brain, because it can be the difference between a terrible finish and a great finish. And maybe that's my problem here lately, is I've gotten a little bit crazy on the things I want to try, and I need to just go back to basics. Like day 2 at the Mississippi River, after getting my butt kicked on day 1 in front of the wing dams on a river that was coming up and changing the current flows. Day 2, I just went and pulled, bottom bouncers with a floating jig head and a piece of night crawler on it, and current that's 4 miles an hour into the current, and just hammered the fish. So, sometimes it's going back to basics instead of thinking you're going to go try to do something new in front of the wing dams, with WallyeX product. It's and getting my butt kicked in the last couple, like, that just drives me even more. Like, it's incredibly disappointing when you have a poor finish, but that just drives me to try to do better and figure out what it is I can do to have those good finishes. But long story short, it started when I was a young kid. I don't even have an idea how young I was. Like, I wasn't very old. We would go up and go camping up at Platte Creek in South Dakota on Lake Francis Case. It's an incredible fishery even to this day. And they actually just had the national team championship down there that Max Wilson and his partner won. And ever since, I'd imagine I probably still would have got the bug, but my dad is one of the best walleye fishermen I know, and that helps a lot because he's such a good fisherman. So having learned from him and continuing to sometimes learn from him, because we'll go out sometimes and he'll just kick my butt, and it's like, I'm just glad you aren't out on the National Walleye Tour too. Just one more vulture to take a check away from me. But so it started young and it just continues.
Do you remember your first NWT?
Yeah, I do. So my first NWT was out of Oconto, Wisconsin, and I think I got like 19th place.
Nice. So, do you remember what you were doing?
What's that?
Do you remember what you were doing? How you're fishing?
Yeah. So at that point in time, I really didn't have much experience with open water trolling spinners. And that's like a very prevalent technique out on the Bay of Green Bay. They pull those spinners around. The fish will suspend different places in the water column, but a lot of times guys will just literally drag those spinners right through the mud down on the southern basin. And we were out there pulling crankbaits, and didn't have forward-facing sonar. I mean, there's no forward-facing sonar, but that, and then I was trying to cast the reefs a little bit with lipless baits, and I really wasn't having much success. And I tried pulling crankbaits over the reefs, really not much success. And one of the guys in the bait shop told me, you should try trolling spinners. And I'm like, well, okay, you need to get these tadpole weights and about a 4 or 5 foot leader, and then put this great big number 6 Colorado blade on, and a bunch of BBs and a couple of hooks, and put a full night crawler on and just go rip this thing around. And I didn't have any idea what I was doing at all. And so I was trolling at like 1.8, 1.9 miles an hour, which, come to find out, was not the right thing to do, but it was the right thing to do because I was just crushing fish doing this. And I had a good tournament, and that was a pretty cool experience. And now just in other places, like even on Lake Oahe, sometimes I just enjoy a nice open water spinner bite because no one up here does it. It's an incredibly effective way to catch fish, and you can get fish in a negative mood that are suspended out over water, and they will always, well, not always, 90% of the time still take, a 9-inch long night crawler pulled behind a spinner blade. And you never know, you could catch a 15-inch walleye, you could catch a perch, but you could also catch a 15-pound walleye. Like it's such an effective way to fish. And one of those things that obviously I have fine-tuned my understanding of open water trolling with spinners since then. But that was a pretty cool first experience with that. And obviously, like out on the Great Lakes, that's still a very popular way to fish. And even like in that same sense now, pulling spoons, for walleye fishing in that same sense, that was something that I'd never done until, we got out to Dunkirk, New York for the championship in 2022 or something like that. I never pulled spoons for walleyes, and that, I'll run now a combination of spinner blades and spoons while I'm trolling, and it's an outside the box way of thinking. If you're from central South Dakota, we think bottom bouncers and spinners right on the bottom, but just that open water trolling thing is and that's that forward facing sonar. We're starting to learn that these fish are everywhere in the water column at any point in time. The water temp could be 80 degrees and they might be 4 feet under the surface. Like these fish, they don't care about water temperature the way that we traditionally think about it, because they're up there to feed in that warm water. And then will they return back to cooler water that is deeper? Yeah, 100%. But those fish that are up shallow in that warmer water, they are there to do one thing, and that is feed.
So when you arrive at a new water, what's kind of the first thing you look for? Is there a certain thing that you want to try to do, or just a certain thing that you look for to kind of start putting you in the right direction? What's the first thing you kind of just key in on?
That's that research aspect of it, right? And with social media, even though I try not to participate in it, it is a valuable resource. And doing a little online research, if you're going to the Bay of Green Bay, we'll use that as an example. Guys will talk about, are the alewives in their thick? And it's like, okay, well, they have plenty of food, so I might need more of a reaction bait. Are they going to be up on the reefs? Are they going to be suspended in the open basin, stuff like that? And then what forage fish are they chasing? And that can tell you a little bit about the color of baits that you want to use or how aggressive you want to be. So I do use Google a lot, just, type in, like, if you're going to the Mississippi River and you're going to be fishing pool 7, pool 7 walleye fishing, and just read, there might be, a forum from 2018 around this time of the year that guys are saying, like, this is what I was doing. Like, that's powerful information that maybe isn't relevant for right now, but at least it gives you a direction of what techniques people are using to be successful, and more so, maybe the structure you want to fish. If it's, rock piles or, wing dams out on the main river channel, in the backwater eddies, whatever it may be. So I would say that, online resources are, very powerful tools, but also just sitting down, with your graph and, your maps and taking a look at your maps. Walleyes love edges. And a lot of times, if you have, shallower water or shallower rock piles, weed beds, timber, stuff like that drops into adjacent deeper water, or maybe you have just, trees that are flooded out that are deep, just structure for these fish to relate to, or probably more importantly, avenues for their prey fish to relate to, like you get different varieties of minnows that, use shoreline, use structure for protection. And you have walleyes that use that same structure for ambush points. Yep. And so, there's a lot of nuances to it. And I don't care what anybody says, nobody has it figured out, but, 100% of the time. But there are places where you just say, well, traditionally, the fish are always in this area. So like if you go up on Lake Oahe, there's certain points that you're going to see 20 boats on every single day. And there's a reason why there's always 20 boats there, because people are catching fish there and they catch fish there all the time. And it's just because they're set up, there's rocks there, or a little weed bed, or has adjacent, deep water structure, or current flows or big. It doesn't matter how big a body of water, how small a body of water that you have, there's always current involved with that. So, like I'll use Lake Oahe as an example. If they're running the Oahe Dam reasonably hard, you have quite a bit of current in that big body of water. I mean, Lake Oahe is a couple miles wide and a couple 100 miles long. And it's amazing how much current there is on certain days. And so you'll get these humps, and it'll be like, well, the day before, I caught them on the upriver side of the hump. Well, today they're not there. I can't catch them there. Why? Well, they're running enough current where basically those fish just jump to the backside of that hump to get out of that current. And it's, just a small little change like that most people overlook. And they go back to shore, they sit down with their buddies around the campfire having some barley soda pops and say, they weren't biting today. No, they were biting today. They just weren't biting because you weren't actually on them. And, so it's just little things like that, or like out on the Great Lakes, and I'll reference the Bay of Green Bay again. If you get a big north wind, the change in water temperature can be detrimental to the fishery too. You might have 70-degree water temp, and then you get a big north wind, and then the next day the water temp's 57 degrees. And it's trying to find pockets of warm water that weren't affected as much by that temperature drop, because that will shut those fish down. Like that's how they're not able to regulate their body temperature like a human. So they rely on that warm water, to keep them operating at their optimum performance. And that's where then local knowledge comes in so big, because these certain areas where the way the current slips and stuff like that work, where you can find these pockets of warmer water and keep catching these fish. Or in general, if you get a big wind and it starts driving that current, these fish are going to set up in those pockets out of the current, because they know that the bait fish is just going to come floating past them, and they can just dart into that current, grab a meal, come back to calmer water, and then rest until they're ready to feed again. So the biggest deal, like breaking down a body of water, is definitely research it out. Don't be afraid to call bait shops. Like the National Walleye Tour, there are no restrictions other than I don't think we can like charter a helicopter or an airplane to fly over a body of water, and I don't think we can hire guides. I think those are about the only two rules that they don't have. So don't be afraid to call bait shops. Bait shops make money by people coming in and buying bait and then providing quality information. Call the bait shop. If they give you some good information, go in there and spend some money, get your bait from them, and make sure and tell them thanks. You guys you run into at the boat ramp, ask them, hey, what's going on? If you're at a body of water that you've never fished before, get on Facebook. If it's a popular destination, you can probably type in Lake Oahe walleye fishing, and there's probably a group in there that you can get in there. And people are generally like, you're going to have some, I'm going to call them knuckleheads, that want to pass you some bad information, but that's in anything in life. But there's a lot of people that truly want to help you and are willing to do so. And obviously, like forums, like I don't know that we really live in the world of forums much anymore, but a lot of them are archived, and you can go back and you can see, like, June of 2015, what people were doing to catch fish. And it may be a pattern that's relevant now, but it also could lead you into areas where people were catching fish. Maybe they're not in 10 feet of water on some sunken island right now, but maybe there's an adjacent shoreline with a bunch of rocks that they're on. So at least you have a general area of where there's fish are. So, just any and all resources you can have. But I would say the biggest one is just sit down with your maps and look at areas that you are comfortable fishing in. Like a lot of times you can find fish in areas that in places you like to fish. So if you're comfortable, bait rigging, and you like open flats and pulling them around, pulling, spinners around, or slow death hooks, or snells with leeches, or creek chubs, or whatever it may be, go find those areas in the lake that you're going to. And there's probably a good chance somewhere along the line you're going to run into some hungry walleyes on the structure you like to fish. Because one thing that we are learning, and I keep referencing back with forward-facing sonar and these high definition side imaging and down imaging sonars that we have access to, that these fish are anywhere and everywhere all the time. They're up shallow in weed beds. They're up shallow in the rocks. They are shallow over 100 feet of water. They're 40 feet down. They're 100 feet down. They're just anywhere and everywhere. That if there is something to eat, if it's a mayfly, a frog, grasshoppers, minnows, perch, carp, little carp, whatever it is. If there is something there for them to eat, they're not going to be far away.
Yeah, that is facts. So of what places haven't been that you want to go fish? Like what place would you love to see come out in the tour next year that you haven't been yet?
So I know this will never happen, but I have been there, but I'm going to still say it anyway. I would love for us to go out to the Columbia River.
Oh, yeah.
So Drew Schutz, this is his first season as a pro on the National Walleye Tour. He traveled with me as a co-angler. We drove out there in March, and that fishery, we pulled the boat out there and everything. And I think it was like 17 and a half hours for us. He lives over in Pierre, right across the river from me. And we drove out there, and it was, not only is it a beautiful place to go catch a fish, but the one night we were doing a lot of night trolling out there. That's pretty prevalent. And the water was a little mudded up because they got an early thaw and some muddy water was coming out of the mountains, out of the Snake River there. But the one night we were trolling and Drew caught this fish and we measured it. And I think it was like 32 and a half inches long. And I mean, it was like thick. And he's like, man, we should weigh that. I was like, that's like a 10-pound walleye, 12-pound walleye. That's nothing. And we just tossed it overboard. We weren't there to keep anything anyway. But like, I just made no big deal, probably because I didn't catch it. Right. So it was just no big deal to toss it back in for him. But then we caught another fish and we weighed it and we're like, okay, that was a lot bigger walleye than what we gave it credit for. And then we started looking at the pictures and we're like, holy cow, we really screwed up by not weighing that thing before we turned it loose. Like, we just got to wait. And I mean, it was such a thick fish. Wow. But you just go out there and, like, to those guys, it's no big deal. It's a 10-pound walleye. Whoop-de-doo, and like Oahe is honestly getting to be that way, like 10-pound walleye. It's no big deal. So I didn't have to drive 17 hours, but I honestly, in Lake Oahe, I don't feel like I'm going to catch a 20-pound walleye where I think that I can go to the Columbia River over the next few years and have a chance at catching a 20-pound walleye, because they're just such healthy fish. And out there, they treat them like vermin. Like, there's no size limit. There's no possession limit, no daily limit. And they have the facilities to have us out there, as far as the boat ramps go. So that would be one where and like I said, I'll name some that I've been to, but I really would like to go to, like, Columbia River. I get that that's a long ways, but I mean, we're going to Dunkirk, New York.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, for a lot of the NWT guys are Wisconsin, Minnesota-ish, right? Yep. Big core. That's a heck of a drive to Dunkirk. It's not much
Dunkirk's
farther.
A long way. I know they would never let us come out there because they're very particular about tournaments out on Fort Peck, but I also feel like Fort Peck would just be such a fun tournament to have. Same deal, it's quality of fish, right? Yeah. And the biggest deal for me is I would love for us to get schedules where no matter where we go, we can cull fish and, like, truly show off what the fishery is capable of doing. And we honestly, sometimes we go to places where we have some really goofy slot restrictions and we don't allow the pros to have total control over what's going on. And I have to give a lot of props to Jeff Kelm, tournament director of the National Walleye Tour. In our last event, he put a lot of effort in. One of the pros, and I don't know who it is, put some effort in, a lot of effort, I should say, as well with the DNR in Wisconsin when we launched out of La Crosse on the Mississippi River, because your limit is only 4 walleyes per person per day. And of those, only one can be over 20 inches. And the way that, we were originally told is if a pro caught say we caught a 25-inch fish, we couldn't catch another over legally, right? And that our not only did they have to cast the line, set the hook, reel the fish in, the pro could have no part of this process. So we were allowed, though, to bring 2 overs in. Well, one of those overs was completely outside the control of the pro. Like, there's nothing I could do about it. Like, but like I said, they put in the process, and by law, their DNR, they researched this out, and they said that the pro could cast, set the hook, and as long as they immediately handed the rod off, the co could reel the fish in, and the pro could net it, and that would be considered legally part of the co's daily limit. And the same way, if the co cast out and caught a 25-inch walleye, and then the co all of a sudden set the hook, this process was supposed to happen fast enough where they couldn't say, "Oh man, this is a big one," and then hand the rod off. Like fish, and then let the pro or the co reel it in, right? Before you're determining, like, you get up beside the boat, it's like, "Oh man, it's a 30-inch fish. Here, take the rod. I'm going to quick net it." But I mean, like, it's kind of wonky that, you know, at that level that we would have rules like that where it kind of takes it out of the hands of the pro, and we have to hand rods off, and you know, it's kind of like the father-son deal or father-daughter deal, like, "Oh, here you go, reel this one in," you know, and we're doing that at the highest level of
so do you think there's a place that catch, pitch, or release be coming in at any time?
I know that there's a big push for it. Me personally,
so
I don't like it at all.
I believe that only the Walleye Federation operates MWC, NWT, and then Burke Nationals in Wisconsin.
Burke National, the national team, yep.
Yeah, I think, and those are the only live weight tournaments left of a national.
The big one, yeah. You know, I know that AIM is doing that NXT tour, and I am very intrigued and excited about that tour. The only thing that I don't necessarily care for in that catch, record, release, and I will fish them. I'm not taking that away. It's just that I would rather bring my fish to the scale, right? Yeah. I don't necessarily like that girth isn't taken into account. You know, if say that you and I are fishing head to head in a catch, record, release, and I catch a 26-inch walleye. Actually, no, I'm going to catch a 28-inch walleye. And it's spawned out, right? It's April, and this fish just got done spawning, and she weighs 6 pounds. And you catch a 27-inch pre-spawn female. Yeah. Well, in the real universe, your walleye probably weighs 2.5 to 3 pounds more than my fish, right? But since all we're going to do is lay it on a bump board and go that way, I'm going to get 1.5 pounds more than you are. Yeah. I just, in that sense, I have a problem with it.
I gotcha. I guess,
but like I still am happy to fish the catch, record, release because I love tournament fishing, and I still like the competition because everybody's playing by it. I just don't like that we're not taking into account the actual weight of the fish, and that's where I guess I'll change my predilection on the catch, record, release. I do like, you know, the MLF where they actually get scales that are verified out, and they weigh the fish and then release. That I like more than just the straight up bump board.
Right.
So that, in that sense, I would like. But I also think the fanfare of physically bringing fish to the weigh-in, I just don't think there's any replacing that. You know, it's one thing to sit and watch, you know, people come, you know, scroll through photos and see the fish they caught. And yeah, that's fun to see, but it's also pretty cool to watch someone come up with, you know, a bag of big fish, and after they get weighed, hold those fish up, and, you know, for everyone to see. Like there's that effect as well.
Right. And, you know, the one thing I do miss about with the catch, record, release is the strategy behind what you keep, right? When you have that of like, hey, am I going for it today? Am I not going for it today? We're not putting anything in there. It's not under 22. And all of a sudden you get a 21.5 and you got to, you know, think about it, whatever. That whole game, the one biggest part I miss about catch, record, release, there's no way to really do that, I guess, in there.
See, and that's
one of the best thing about live weight.
I mean, I understand that, but also I'll go back to, I love the ability to cull. Like if I want to keep that 21.5 and then I catch a 22, that obviously if that fish is healthy, you know, you're not going to throw a fish in that you caught out of 50 feet of water, belly up and hydrate from there. That obviously I have a big problem with. But, you know, if the fish are healthy and able to be released, then, you know, I like that part where you can cull, because then you're kind of going head to head on what are your best fish. Like what could you do in that sense? So I guess I would disagree a little bit on that, but I guess, you know, in that catch, record, release, you could say, well, you have 10 spots on your card and we're going to take the 5, you know, or something like that. But I do like the ability, like when we get out on the Great Lakes, you know, when we go to Dunkirk, when we're on Lake Huron, you know, if I throw a 2-pound walleye in and all of a sudden I have 4 8-pounders and I catch it a 5th 8-pounder, I can throw that 2-pounder back into Lake Huron and watch that fish swim away and hydrate from there. That I think is a pretty neat way to do it. But then also, you know, that catch, record, release, you get around a lot of these goofy rules of you know, how many fish did an individual fisherman catch, and you know, the slot restrictions and stuff like that. So
the slot restrictions are making life tough. It's tough to really.
And I always make just terrible decisions. Like, you know, if it's slot, you know, like I had some family in town and we've just been out fun fishing, and like yesterday morning we got done and I said, you know, if we were out tournament fishing, I wouldn't have kept any of the fish we caught. And that can just be massively detrimental, because then I would have went to the scale and I would have had no fish. So there you have it.
All right, I'll get you out on one last question. If you could only go fishing one more time, where you going, what you doing, and who you taking? It would be.
I'll even give you the time of year. It would be October. I would launch out of Swan Creek on Lake Oahe, and it would definitely be me and my dad. Awesome. And we would go forward facing sonar fishing, probably over the trees on Lake Oahe, in hopes of that 18+ pound walleye. It's just Lake Oahe it's an incredible fishery, and it's only getting better.
So where can people track down WallyeX products? And
so WallyeX.com. You can check everything else out there. We do have a Facebook page. I do like on it. I do click like when it comes up. So like I said, you know, we have a really pretty phenomenal product lineup right now, and we are working on a lot of cool new stuff. Like I'm super excited for the next 18 months of what we got going on. Like we're on a positive trajectory, and I think that is only going to continue upward for us. So check them out, WallyeX.com, or on social media.
Awesome. If you're looking
we're on Instagram too. I always forget about Instagram. I think that's like the more popular thing. I always reference back to Facebook.
I always call the Facebook fish book now, because it seems like a lot of fishermen have kind of went back into there.
Yeah. Always forget about Instagram, but Instagram. Right.
So if you're looking at the next episode of Walleye Chronicles, hit me up on my socials at Matt Snell on Facebook or Instagram, and Smiling Fish on the TikTok. Remember, there's 2 things you can do to make someone's life awesome every day. 1, give them a smile, and 2, take them fishing. Thanks a lot.